Magandang hapon sa lahat, lalo na yung ating mga viewers na nasa Zoom at saka nasa Facebook. We are now on the third day of the Extractives Transparency Week, and welcome to this segment on Extractives Governance and Community Development. Ito na yung huling segment under the sustainability pillar of this week-long celebration of the Extractives Transparency Week or ETW. Ako si Jane Baldago, miyembro ng PHEITI Secretariat at ako ang tutulong sa inyo na magpadaloy ng segment na ito sa buong maghapon. We have around an hour and a half for this segment. This is a webinar that highlights mechanisms and tools in place to ensure that good and exclusive governance of the country's natural resources, especially with regard to extractive industries. We have a full house of resource persons this afternoon. Yung iba sa kanila mag-share ng update tungkol sa mga policies that govern the sector, identify policies and implementation gaps, at magre-recommend din kung paano may improve ang governance and natural resources and the extractives. Meron namang iba sa kanila will also share tools and platforms to diagnose corruption risks in the extractives. Meron din tayong isang representative mula sa probinsya ng South Cotabato who will share how they encourage community members to participate in natural resource management. At para formal na simulan ang ating segment na ito, we have the Director of the Mines and Geosciences Bureau of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. He's both a lawyer and a licensed mining engineer. He started his career managing open pit and mechanized underground mine operations. He currently serves as Director of the Mindanao Association of Mining Engineers and part-time professor at the University of Southeastern Philippines in Davao City. Friends, please welcome MGB Director Attorney Wilfredo Mancano.
Honorable Governor Dakila Carlo Cua, members of the PHEITM Multi-Stakeholder Group, my fellow officials and workers in the government, members of the private sector and the civil society, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the PHEITI Multi-Stakeholder Group, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the third day and seventh event of the PHEITI Extractives Transparency Week, the webinar on extractives governance and community development. With the theme, Synergizing Transparency for Sustainability, the first 3 days of the Extractives Transparency Week have been designed to delve in the themes of synergy, transparency, and sustainability. On the first day of this week, we had the Women and Extractives Talk and the EITI 101 orientation, where we showcased how different sectors and various extractive governance frameworks synergize in one global standard of transparency and accountability in the mining, oil, and gas sector. Yesterday, the second day of the week, we talked about transparency in processes in the webinar, Add Up, Computing Revenue Collections and Allocation, and Transparency in Extractives Ownership in the online forum, The Real Owners. Yesterday afternoon, the multi-stakeholder group of PHEITI also had a conversation with PHEITI implementing agencies regarding systematic and comprehensive data disclosures. Today, it is all about sustainability and how the extractive sector is pursuing long-term benefits of resource utilization. Just this morning, we had the extractives data blitz, our virtual conference exhibit where we heard our industries share about their social and environmental initiatives as well as efforts to respond to COVID 19. We also heard from our non-government partners who shared about studies, tools, and initiatives that contribute to Extractive's governance and sustainable development. This afternoon, we have the opportunity to revisit existing and emerging governance mechanisms that we think should not only be chasing after national development, but should also be directed to contribute to local and community development. We want to know this afternoon how we can optimize PHEITI disclosure for the benefit of communities that host extractive operations. This is why we are very privileged to have our roster of speakers today who are experts in their respective fields. We are thankful for their time and effort to prepare and join us today. I am confident that we will learn so much from their talks and presentations. We are also grateful to all our webinar participants who made time for our event. We hope that you will find the discussions this afternoon worthwhile and meaningful. And last, we thank the PHCITR for putting this event together and for always moving conversations in Extractive's governance forward. On behalf of the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, I congratulate PHEITI for its 7th anniversary and for the success of the Extractives Transparency Week. May PHEITI continue to be a catalyst of reforms in the mining, oil, and gas sectors. Again, welcome to this webinar, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat, Director Moncano. And to set the tone for this segment, we will hear from the good governor of the province of Quirino. When he was vice governor of the province, he championed the welfare and future of the youth of Quirino and founded a movement for the integrated development of the youth, or MIDY. As a governor, he focused on health, education, livelihood, infrastructure, agriculture, good governance, and of course, natural resource governance. He's also a supportive of non-government organizations and civil society organizations concerned on human resources and livelihood development in the province of Quirino. Pakinggan natin ang Honorable Governor of the Province of Quirino and National Chairperson of the League of Provinces and President of the Union of Local Government Authorities of the Philippines, or ULAP, Governor Dakila Dax Kua. Governor Kua, please.
Hello, magandang hapon po. I hope everybody can hear me. Um, to our fellow officials and workers in government, special mention po sa ating kagalang-galang na MGB Director Moncano, our friends in the civil society, our guests from international organizations, to participants tuning in via Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant day to all of you. First, nagpapasalamat po ako sa Department of Finance and the Philippine Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative for putting this online forum together, given the calamities that we just recently experienced. I believe it is timely that major actors in government, private sector, and the civil society really take time to discuss issues and challenges involving natural resource management. The value of natural resources varies according to the benefits that they provide. Some resources are essential for protection of inhabitants, while some are meant to meet the wants and needs of the community. It evidently supports life and meets our various needs. For instance, Mountains and forests may act as natural protectors against typhoons. In the province of Quirino, where I serve as governor, there is a huge natural wall that helps shield our inhabitants from tropical storms. I'm talking about the Sierra Madre mountain range on the eastern side of the Cagayan Valley region. It has always provided us with natural cover from strong winds and torrential rains. As custodians and good stewards of natural wealth, it is critical for local government units to craft programs that ensure efficient and sustainable development of our natural resources. In our province of Quirino, the QLIFE, which stands for Quirino Livelihood for Everyone, specifically the program on upland ecosystem, was created in 2009 to implement the River Watershed Rehabilitation Project. In this program, coffee plantations were established to rehabilitate the four major watershed areas, namely Dumadata, Ganano, Cagayan, and Adalam. This initiative spawned both economic and ecological benefits to our upland communities by providing sources of livelihood and protecting our forests. Clearly, resource governance is a significant mechanism that benefits present and future generations. That being said, meron po akong katanungan to our fellow government workers and speakers in this forum. And the question goes, how is extractive governance relevant to and beneficial for the members of our communities? For the province of Quirino, which hosts the Dipio mine, which, which delivers significant socio-economic benefit to our neighboring communities, operating within a fixed fiscal regime, the Didipio mine is holder of the first FTAA, or Financial and Technical Assistance Agreement. While it has provided livelihood to more than 1,500 individuals, both from national and local communities, the mining operation is consistently monitored, inspected, and verified by national and local government agencies and monitoring teams. Regular internal and external audits are also conducted to ensure its compliance with existing regulations. As the national chairperson of the League of Provinces of the Philippines and the president of the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines, naunawaan ko po, I understand fully that sustainable community development is an important matter to my fellow local chief executives in provinces where there are mining operations. Not only the question, or the question is not only how resource utilization translates to benefits enjoyed by communities, but how the larger extractive governance framework contributes to community development, especially considering that members of the community are the ones usually and mostly affected by extractive projects. We understand that there are large revenues derived from the utilization of our natural resources, and a portion of these revenues return to our local government units as their share or our share in national wealth. Revenue transparency, which has been one of the major accomplishments of EITI implementation here in our country, certainly help in the monitoring of these revenues and shares of local government units in the national wealth. Revenue transparency has enabled accountability from both the government and private sector stakeholders, and it has definitely helped report the well-meaning contribution of the extractive sector to the national development. Admittedly, the financial data and information reported by the Philippine EITI have to continue to go through in-depth study and analysis to give us more comprehensive understanding of the impact of mining industry to national development. A literature review on natural resources management, transparency, and governance suggests that we still lack empirical evidence of development impact of transparency and accountability initiatives and the extent to which these improve the governance of natural resources. In other words, sa madaling salita, we have to find uses for all this data, information, and transparency tools to facilitate direct beneficial impact on local governments and, more importantly, the communities. But we do appreciate what extractive transparency have done so far. And we believe that conversations on extractive transparency and extractive governance must always continue and carry on. As a final note, I would like to briefly share that Quirino's response to COVID-19 pandemic has involved significant community cooperation. The inclusive partnership with all the municipal local government units, national agencies, private sector, and stakeholders jointly leverage our strengths toward a common solution. We have been stronger and more effective working together, proactively engaging stakeholders, aligning and coordinating our efforts. The community united in action approach is also useful in our other initiatives, such as in health, nutrition, and social welfare and development programs, and in the protection of our environment, forests, and watersheds. In this approach, listening to every member of the community and uniting the community in one concrete action are key components. I encourage our extractive stakeholders to look into this approach as a way of empowering community members and encouraging them to participate in governance. I am proud to say that the province of Quirino has exemplified communities united in action, and we will continue to harness this unity and teamwork and our efforts to build a better Quirino and a brighter future for our children during this pandemic and, of course, beyond. And with that, I thank you all for the time and for intently listening. Despite the logistical challenges of our current situation, I appreciate your commitment to efforts that pursue the sustainable development of our communities. I have faith that our webinar participants will learn so much from our roster of speakers today. And I hope that innovative and concrete actions to help extractive governance translate to community development will surface more during these discussions. I thank the team behind this program and the entire Extractives Transparency Week. And on behalf of the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines and our dear LGUs, local government units, I congratulate the Philippine Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative for its 7th anniversary tomorrow, November 26th. May the Philippine EITI, as a platform for transparency, accountability, and good governance, continue to expand, remain relevant, and be institutionalized for the benefit of communities today and, of course, the future. Again, maraming salamat po at mag-ingat po tayong lahat.
Maraming salamat, Governor Kua, for your very inspiring words at ang mga challenges na iniwanan nyo para sa ating mga stakeholders. Tignan natin kung masasagot yung inyong katanungan, paano nagbibigay ng benepisyo ang extractive sa communities. At hindi na po natin patatagalin yan. Simulan na natin ngayon sa usapan ng current policies that ensure resource utilization is translated to community development. So we have the Community Development Officer 3 from the Mines and Geosciences Bureau Central Office. His professional background is on the fields of participatory research, community and social development policies, program monitoring and evaluation system, among others. He is also an advocate of gender and development issues. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Calvin Perez. Sir Calvin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Jane. Share screen na po ako. So good afternoon po everyone. Sabi po ni Ma'am Jane ay current policies on social development and management program. As we go along sa presentation po, mag-highlight po ako nung mga pre-laws and IRRs dahil po sa kaalaman ng lahat, more than 19 years na po ang implementation ng SDMP sa mining industry po. So first, Ano po ba ang legal basis ng SDMP? Currently po, ang main law ng implementation ng SDMP ay based sa Republic Act number 7942 or in the Philippine Mining Act of 1995 that was signed into law on August 1995 nung panahon po nung Ramos administration natin. It states there specifically when it comes to mining communities or local communities under a mining project, a contractor shall assist in the development of its mining community, the promotion of the general welfare of its inhabitants, and development of science and mining technology. So dalawang aspect po yun, yung local communities and yung development ng science and mining technology. Yung sa mining technology po, it directly refers to the improvement of the operation of a mining company. But sabi ko nga po kanina, matagal na po yung SDMP. Before the SDMP was lumabas po, meron na pong mga pre-mining act, pre-Philippine Mining Act of 1995 laws na pinagsimulan ng SDMP. So I will highlight as I go along sa aking presentation po. Ang pinakauna pong notable law pertaining to the management of the mineral lands ay yung Presidential Decree number 463. This was conceptualized noong 1974 at yung sumunod po yung Executive Order number 279 noong 1989. Yung under PD 463, there was the initial imposition of social obligations. No, initially po, ito ay lumabas. However, because of the earliest stage of that law, it was not strengthened enough and that it caused many mines to close noong mga panahon po na yon. And then yung mga mining communities na nag-start out po na lumabas, ay unfortunately, they became ghost towns. And as we move along the timeline, before the Philippine Mining Act, lumabas po yung EO number 279. This is the transitory law habang yung Mining Act po natin ay dinideliberate pa po sa level ng Kongreso. Yung laman po nung EO or yung Executive Order number 279 ay dito na po lumabas. Nabanggit nga po kanina ni Governor Kua yung mga term na FTAA. Ayan, dito po siya unang lumabas, pati po yung mga sharing agreements natin ngayon. Ang basis po ng guidance ng prediction or yung identification and mitigation of the environmental and social impacts of a mining operation is based on the Philippine EIS system o yung Environmental Impact Statement System. Na mapaghanggang ngayon po ay ganun pa rin po ang gamit. And of course, the provision of the policy of the development of the mining communities, mining technology and geosciences. Now, dito po sa Republic Act po na ito, under Section 58, dito na po na-elaborate initially na para saan po ba yung benefits for the mining communities. Please take note po na wala pa po dito yung SDMP na term. No? The SDMP term was not yet conceptualized, but ito po yung nag-guide towards doon. And you will know later po as I go along. It states in Section 58, any activity or expenditure intended to enhance the development of the mining and neighboring communities of a mining operation other than those required by or provided for existing laws or CBAs and the like. Ito na po yun. And of course, yung pangalawa po, activity or expenditure directed towards the development of geosciences and mining technology. Of course, dahil po meron pong mother law, ito naman po yung mga implementing rules and regulation sa pagpapatupad pa po ng SDMP o yung benefits for the mining communities. These are the implementing rules and regulations. But of course, historical na po yan. So I will run down briefly po para mas maintindihan po ng lahat kung saan nagsimula ang SDMP natin ngayon. Of course, yung pinakauna pong administrative order o yung pinakaunang IRR is yung DAO number 1995-23. Dito po talaga extensively na po diniscuss yung development of the mining communities, science and technology. Okay, yung sumunod po na implementing rules and regulation, which is yung 9640, dito na po na-conceptualize yung source o yung basis for the funding of the programs. Sinasabi po rito, and I will just highlight, 1% of the direct mining and milling costs as basis for the development of the said mining communities and for mining technology and geosciences. Now, yung sumunod po na administrative order, ito na rin po na-conceptualize na ang SDMP o yung Social Development and Management Program. Ito po yung DNR Administrative Order number 2000-99. Dito po mas lumawak na yung programang para sa mga communities natin. Of course, yung sumunod na administrative order, which is yung 2004-54, na-devolve na po yung approval ng 5-year SDMP. Dati po kasi dito po sa central office, ina-evaluate and then ina-aprobahan ng mga 5-year SDMP natin. So na-devolve na po siya dun sa 2004-54. Tapos na-elaborate na po yung 1%. Meron na po siyang clear-cut na composition. So out of the 1% DMMC, which is yung mining and milling cost, 90% po doon yung para sa mining communities and the remaining 10% para po sa mining technology. Yung sumunod na administrative order po natin, which is yung 2010-13, binago na po yung allocation. Mas tumaas na po from the 1% direct mining and milling cost, naging 1.5% na po siya ng operating cost ng isang project. Tapos nag-evolve na rin po yung composition, naging 3 na po yung composition nito. Na-retain po yung para sa host and neighboring communities. And then nadagdag po dito yung component para sa IEC o yung Information, Education, and Communication. And then lastly po yung para sa Mining Technology and Geosciences. Na-highlight din po dito yung pagmamanage po ng mga IPs at mga ICCs natin. Kasi po lingid sa kaalaman ninyo, sa mga host and neighboring communities, meron po mga na-identify na mga IPs and ICCs. So para hindi po sila ma-left out o ma-left behind sa conventional communities, synchronize na po dito na kapag meron pong IP sa isang project, magiging guide po ng implementation ng SDMP ay yung sa IPRA-LO. Tapos po, yung mga operating companies po, dati po kasi mandated lang yung operating. Ngayon po, pati po yung mga exploration companies ay nire-require naman din po ng similar SDMP. Ang tawag po dito ay yung Community Development Program. Na merong ang budgetary allocation niya ay equivalent of 1% of the approved 2-year exploration work program. And currently, ito pong nasa harap ninyo, ito po yung kinonsolidate na po yung mga IRR po na mga nabanggit ko, no? Ito po yung tinatawag na Consolidated DNR Administrative Order number 2010-21. So lahat po ng mga nabanggit ko po, na-highlight ko po kanina sa mga nakaraang administrative order o ng mga IRR, ito na po siya ngayon. Ito na po yung currently na naging gabay na naming lahat po bilang regulating agency at sinusunod din ng mga regional offices namin and then of course the mining companies. So in the Department of Environment and Natural Resources Administrative Order number 2010-21, ito po yung the current implementing rules and regulations of the Philippine Mining Act. And of course, our focus is on the SDMP. This is the chapter wherein the SDMP is articulated. First and foremost po, under Section 134, it explicitly says there that the contractor permit holder shall assist in the development of the host and neighboring communities. So kung ano po yung ma-identify ng mga host and neighboring communities, ayan po, assist po yan ng contractor or ng permit holder para po matuloy-tuloy ang development niya, and of course to achieve yung sustainability of the said communities. Of course, the same contractor shall allot annually a minimum of 1.5% of the operating cost necessary to implement the three components of the SDMP, which is yung DHNC or the Development of the Host and Neighboring Community, IEC, and the DMTG programs. Ang percentage po niyan, for the DHNC po, 75% out of the 1.5%. IEC is 15% and DMTG is the remaining 10%. Operating cost po, what we mean by operating cost, ito po yung previous year's cost to produce a saleable product. So ang calculation po nito ay net income before tax. So any expenditures related to mining, extraction, treatment, processing, exploration activities, power, maintenance, administration, excise tax, etc. etc. Nagpapadala po sila ng mga sworn statement nila, and then nakakompute na rin po dun yung 1.5% for the implementation of the SDMP. Of course, kapag may budget, ano po yung mga credited activities? Under Section 135, there are at least 5 yan, na binigyan po ng pahintulot ng ating batas that the allocation is credited. So pagdating po dito sa human resource development and institutional building, basically ito po yung mga training, support trainings, startup trainings, or improvement of identified skills. Yan. Para po yung mga skills training tulad po yung nakikita niyo po sa example ko, ito pong nasa far left, ito po ay kuha ko po sa Filminera, support of the suing livelihood organization. Yan po, care of TESDA po yan. Itong pangalawa po, training din po yan for welding and other electrical works. And of course, yung panghuli, in support of the packaging po ng local products produced sa isang community po doon sa Surigao. Next credited activity po ay enterprise development and networking, o simply put, livelihood programs. So ito po, funds are allocated for the support of existing livelihood programs ng communities. For example, ito po, vegetable gardening. Yan po, locally managed po yan. Meron pong mga cooperative na buo dyan, na organize. And of course, sa gitna po ay poultry. And then dito po sa pangatlo, ito po is a wise use of waste. Ito po ay care of a cement company in Teresa, Rizal. So imbis po na diretso na po ng waste, part po ng waste management ng LGU po, ng barangay dito, ay ginagawa pong livelihood o pinagkakakitaan yung mga waste na galing din sa paligid nila. The third is the assistance to infrastructure development and support services. Ito po yung mga public and social infrastructures natin. Commonly po, mga example niyan ay farm-to-market road, mga anything construction o civil works. And I will just add po, to highlight po, hindi lang po nalilimit doon sa sinabi ko po na example. Kung titingin po kayo sa far left, ito po ay bagsakan ng mga produce, ng mga nahuli pong isda. Kasi sa unahan po niyan ay dagat. This is a barangay in Davao of a cement company. Hinighlight ko po to kasi ang tawag po dito ay post-harvest facility. Pwede po yun na i-fund ng sa SDMP po in support of existing livelihood activities. And to my far left, ganun din po, ano po ito, parang multi-purpose na building para po sa mga bagsakan ng mga raw materials or yung endemic products produced around the barangays of a mining company. So hindi lamang po nalilimitahan sa social infrastructures, specifically access po ng daan and everything. So pati rin po in support for livelihood activities.
Request for Calvin to wrap up the
Yes.
presentation. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. So yun po, access to education, health, yan po, basic po social services, and of course, yung protection and respect of socio-cultural values, ayan po, to enhance and to magkaroon po ng strengthening ng mga barangays, ng mga communities. Ayan po, sa 136A naman po, ito po yung how to prepare the SDMP. Ito po ay in consultation and in partnership with the host and neighboring communities. Of course, all the PPAs or yung mga programs, projects, and activities ay ina-identify po together with the host and neighboring communities. Kasama na rin po dyan yung hanggang municipal level po natin para po makita talaga how transparent our program is. Hindi po dinidictate ng company because sila ang may pera, hindi po ganun. These are for the communities that where the mining project is located. Ito po yung processing ng program natin. After po maaprubahan ng SDMP, na-highlight ko po na yung magkikreate po ng Memorandum of Agreement with the representatives of the host neighboring communities. And then the contractor shall provide each of the LGUs concerned and the host and neighboring communities of the approved SDMP po. Para po talaga po yung transparency purpose ay ma-achieve. And of course, jointly po ito kasing i-implement annually. So 5-year SDMP, annual implementation po of the SDMP. So far, ito po yung, I highlighted this kasi ito po yung current po nating sinusunod for the implementation, monitoring, and eventual assessment sa impact po and sustainability of all the SDMP programs in the country today. So yun lang po, Ms. Jane. I think I have reached the point na nakuha ko na po lahat. Thank you po.
Salamat, Sir Calvin. I'm sure mamaya marami pa kayo ma-share sa ating Q&A portion. So yan po, narinig natin yung policies mula sa hanay ng Mines and Geosciences Bureau. Ngayon, pakinggan natin yung mga related and complementing policies ng local government. So we have the Director of the Bureau of Local Government Development, the Bureau which leads the development and formulation of the policies and programs for the capacity development of LGUs. Siya ay isang very active na member ng governing body ng PHEITI o ng MSG. Please welcome Director Ana Bonagua. Director Ana, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Thank you, Jane. Ako po ay naatasan to present the current policies that ensure resource utilization translate to community development. Okay, so simulan po natin. Can you share my slide, please? Okay, simulan po natin sa susunod na slides. Gusto ko lang pong balikan muna ito, no? This is the premise, the context of our discussion today. Next slide, please. The Philippine natural resource potential. Alam naman natin, so we are very proud as Filipinos that the Philippines has vast natural resources to provide essential ecosystems, good and services to the population. Marami tayong natural resources. The Philippines is one of the 17 mega diverse countries in the world, and it hosts around 70 to 80% of the world's biodiversity. The Philippine archipelago, boasts sizable reserves of nickel, gold, silver, copper, zinc, and chromite, and currently produces modest quantity, but currently produces modest quantities of oil and gas and natural gas. In fact, actually, 30% of the total land area, or 90 million hectares, is found to be geologically prospective for metallic minerals. So with that, actually, the Philippines cannot discount the potential contribution of its natural resources for wealth creation and improving the well-being of its constituents. Marami po tayong potential that we can use for revenue generation, wealth creation in the Philippines, as well as improving the well-being of our constituents and the communities. So yun po yung context natin ngayon. Ngayon, at the level of the local government units, ano ang share ng local government units sa national resource revenues, yung mga nakukuha nating wealth from the natural resources. From the Constitution provides under Article 10, Section 7, that local government units shall be entitled to an equitable share in the proceeds of the utilization and development of the national wealth within their respective areas in the manner provided by law, including sharing the same with the inhabitants by way of direct benefits. So, merong sinasabi sa Constitution na share ng local government, but it has to be shared with the inhabitants by way of direct benefits. And the Local Government Code, Section 284, provides that local government units shall have an equitable share, so miniro niya yung Constitution, in the proceeds derived from the utilization and development of the national wealth within their areas or within their respective areas, including sharing the same with the inhabitants by way of direct benefits. So, mirror lang ng Local Government Code ang provision ng Constitution. The the Local Government Code, next slide please, also provides how much the share or anong portion of the pie that local government units will be getting from the natural resource revenues. Next slide po. Okay. From Section 290 of the Local Government Code provides that the local government unit shall have a share of 40% of the gross collection derived by the national government from the preceding fiscal year from the mining taxes, royalties, forestry, and fishery charges, and such other fees and charges, including related surcharges, interest, fines, and other shares from any co-production, joint venture, or production sharing agreement in the utilization and development of the national wealth within their respective jurisdiction. So, yan yung ating legal basis. Ano ba yung mga, next slide, different types of natural resource revenues, saan ito nanggagaling at sino yung mga collecting agencies? For forest charges, these are being collected by the Department of Environment Natural Resources, DNR. For royalty income from mineral reservation, DNR then through the MGB, Mines and Geosciences Bureau, and energy resource production, DOE, is the one collecting, and for mining taxes, it's the Bureau of Internal Revenues. So all this collection, when sum up together, may share ang local governments of 40%. How are these allocated naman to the different levels of local government units? The allocation of LGUs depends on the location of the natural resource as provided in Section 292 of the Local Government Code. If the natural resource are located in 2 or more provinces or in 2 or more cities or in 2 or more municipalities or in 2 or more barangays, the respective shares will be computed on the basis of population and land area. So it will be 70% for population and 30% for land area. If the natural resource naman is located within one province, 20% will go to the province, 45% to the municipalities, and 35% to the barangays. And if the natural resource is located in a city, HUC or ICC, Independent Component City, the city gets 65%, and the barangays within the city gets the other half of 35%. So yan po yung sharing how much of that 40% each level of local government units gets from the natural resource revenues. Meron din pong next slide, there is also an allocation given to indigenous peoples or indigenous cultural communities. Where mining operation, ito ay binanggit din ni Director Calvin kanina, where mining operations occur within the ancestral lands of indigenous people, under the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, the mining activities of in ancestral lands can only be undertaken with free and prior informed consent of the local indigenous people, and also providing some indigenous peoples group with an opportunity to negotiate higher revenue shares. So as mentioned also by Director Calvin, kapag located in an ancestral lands, yung IPRA now governs the utilization and the management of the natural resource and even the sharing of the revenues in that particular area. The Mining Act also obliged the operator to pay royalties to indigenous people to at least 1% of the gross output to the indigenous groups or indigenous peoples or communities of which are directly affected by the mining operation. So hindi lang po local governments but also yung mga IPs or indigenous cultural communities who are affected by the mining operation are receiving some shares or some revenues and resources from the revenues generated from the utilization of the national wealth or the national resources, including the extractive sector. Okay. In terms of utilization, well, sinama namin to across different levels of local government units, yung utilization of the national revenues. We have discussed the allocation, and then how now are we utilizing the natural resource revenues. For the national government, naiiwan sa kanila yung 50%, 60% plus the other resources pa from the natural extractive industry or not use of natural resources. These are being used to transform economic and social conditions at the national and local level. So very general. So it can be used to all activities that will actually espouse economic and social development in the country, even at the local level. For local government units, very specific under the provision of the Local Government Code, that the shares of local government units from the revenues of natural resources shall be devoted to local development and livelihood projects. In case of revenues from energy sources, oil and gas, stipulated in the Local Government Code that such amount, 80% of such amount shall be earmarked to reducing the cost of electricity, and the remaining 20% for local development and livelihood projects. While for the IPs or the indigenous people or indigenous cultural communities, the programs are the revenues are suggested to be used for programs and projects that will redound to the benefit of the community, the indigenous people's community. And also, yung special funds, as presented earlier, yung SDNP is one of the special funds. So these are to be used for the purpose that they were created under the law, such as environmental protection, enhancement, rehabilitation, or for social development and management purposes. Okay, next. How do we now ensure naman that the utilization of such resources are actually responding to the needs of the community, especially the affected communities or the communities affected by the extractive operation? The Constitution puts emphasis on the promotion and protection of the rights of the people and the civil society organizations and platforms for effective and reasonable participation at all levels of social and political economic decision making. So very important po yung participation of the community, and sometimes represented by non-government organization and civil society organizations. The Local Government Code, RA 7160, also provides a space or provides spaces and appropriate policies for citizen engagement in local governance. Isa po dito yung establishment of the various local development or local special bodies at the local level. So kasama po dito yung local PBAC, so they also have Prequalification and Needs and Awards Committee, local school board, local health board, local peace and order council, and the local development council. Dito sa local development council, next slide please. The local development council is actually a crucial institution or a crucial body for participatory process in development planning in local governments, because the local development council are tasked to formulate comprehensive development plan, long-term, medium, and short-term plans for local government units and all other derivative plans of local governments. Marami po tayong derivative plans. Tawag po namin dyan ay derivative plans, GOD plan, disaster risk reduction management plan, local climate change action plans. But all these plans should all be integrated into the comprehensive development plan of local government units, because based on the law, the comprehensive development plan will be the basis of the investment program as well as the budget of local government units. So napaka-importante po dito ng Local Development Council. And here in the Development Council, we, the local government could encourage the fullest participation of everyone. In fact, provided under the local government code that 1/4 of the membership of the local development council should be coming from the civil society organization, NGO, civil society, even people's organization. And they can also be members in the various sectoral committees of the development council. There are a lot of social sectoral committees. You have the economic committee, infrastructure committee, social committee, and there might be other committees created by local government units as they see fit and needed in their localities. So ito yung mechanism to ensure that the plans and the utilization of the natural resource revenues are actually responsive to the needs of the communities and the affected families or communities, localities of the mining operation or the extractive operation. The next slide will show us some recommendations that we actually put forward in our previous capacity as head of the Poverty Environment Initiative as a program under the UNDP, where we came up with some recommendation after a study, some recommendation for policy reforms in the use of the social development management plan of mining companies. And we suggested some of some policy reforms which includes the following. First, alignment, support, and harmonization with local development plans. We know that the SDMP guidelines has been developed previously, and some of these items are not yet incorporated. But considering that there are now advocacies and campaign for the alignment of the local development plans of local government units with that of the national development plan, particularly the Philippine Development Plan, as with the regional development plan. We now call on that at least even the SDMP plans or the SDMP should also be aligned with the local development plans of local government units. Ibig sabihin, there will be a broader perspective for the development of the activities and interventions under the SDMPs. And then yung sunod, in relation to that, there will be, we hope that there will be a broader coverage of host or impact communities in the social development management plan. I think in the current guidelines, the host or impact communities only refers to purok or barangays, and we hope that this can be broadened to barangays, to municipalities, and even probably the provinces, as they are all affected by the mining operations, not just the communities that are very immediate to the extractive areas. And then third is on improving the monitoring mechanism through the participation of local government units. So we hope that there will be a greater participation by LGUs in the monitoring of the implementation of the programs. There are very good SDMPs, and we hope that these are really actually implemented on the ground. And then the last one is that along the first three that we have mentioned, we hope to ensure genuine community consultation in the SDNP process. Okay, so the next slide now, in monitoring, now what are the mechanisms of in monitoring the utilization and management of the natural resource revenues at the local level? Recently, maybe around 3-4 years ago or 5 years ago, we started with the institutionalization of the environment revenue management tool at the local level. Ito yung ENRDMT, which is a web-based interface linked to the electronic statement of receipts of local government units, where and this is intended to monitor the financial information relative to the shares from the national wealth, as well as the direct payments made by the extractive industry. So these are, ginagamit natin ito in the reporting of the PHEITI every year for the reports by local government units, and this is the tool that we are currently using. The ENRDMT actually captures with detail the following information: yung local taxes, fees, and user charges paid by the extractive industries to the local government units, the share of national wealth received by local government units, as well as the tagging of expenditure items from the national proceeds. So as much as possible, we want to make sure that these revenues and these resources are actually being used for the benefits of the communities and the localities. Okay, and then next slide po, in order to sustain the use of the national resource revenues and ensure that there is impact to the community, in the planning process, in the budgeting processes of local government units, we have been establishing multi-sectoral participation that will ensure a participatory, consultative, and inclusive plans and budget of local government units through the mobilization of the Local Development Council, as we've mentioned, and its sectoral and functional committees, and through an interface with national government agencies with functions devolved to local government units, so that local government units can harmonize and synchronize their activities and interventions with the national plans and priorities. And the last one is complementation between and among the provinces across local government units. We want to ensure coherence of the development across boundaries or beyond boundaries or of the jurisdiction of the local government units. So, and hopefully with this, we ensure that the revenues we generate from extracting resources or extracting natural resources are actually being used to redound to the benefits for the communities and the welfare of the communities, as well as protecting the integrity of the environment. So I think that's the last of my slide. Marami pong salamat at magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Maraming salamat, Director Ana. At ngayon, napakinggan natin yung mga policies from MGB at sa DILG, no? At this point, pakinggan natin kung paano na-apply itong mga policies at saka mga mechanisms sa sub-national level. And to share the perspective and experience in encouraging community participation in extractive governance, let us hear from the provincial government of South Cotabato, a commitment holder in the Open Government Partnership. And joining us today is the Provincial Environment and Natural Resource Officer of the Province of South Cotabato, and an environmental consultant on policy development, environmental management to different non-government organizations, academic institutions. Please welcome Mr. Siegfried Flaviano. sorry, but I think we have to fix the volume of the presentation of Mr. Flaviano. But at this point, baba tayo ng konti sa mas micro na level. Let us hear the development in extractive host communities, the gaps, and kung paano na-identify yung gaps in the different sectors facilitated by a civil society organization. So let us hear the presentation of the chairperson of the Sectoral Transparency Alliance on Natural Resource Governance in Cebu, or STANS. Is also an active member of the multi-sectoral group. Please welcome Dr. Glenn Pajares. Dr. Glenn?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Glenn G. Pajares, the chair of the Sectoral Transparency Alliance on Natural Resource Governance of the province of Cebu. We are a civil society organization advocating for transparency and accountability in the extractive industries in the said province. Allow me to present briefly the important role of civil society organizations in good natural resource governance. So first, when we talk about natural resource governance, we are speaking of good governance per se. One important element of good governance is inclusion. We are reminded that mining should not only benefit one or two or a few people in society, but rather all. And by virtue of equitable justice, mining should benefit the least advantaged members of society, namely fisher folks, farmers, women, the elderly, those with special needs, the youth, among others, in mining affected communities. So, civil society organization ensures or provides a space or an avenue for these people to speak out their thoughts, their perspectives, their experiences, and they should be heard and listened to, and their welfare will be taken care of. This is what participation is all about. Second, civil society organization play a very important role in demanding transparency and accountability. It is the role of civil society organization to empower and inform people of the functions of government and government agencies and the industry relative to the extractive industries and natural resource governance in general, so that they can engage constructively and demand responsibility from these institutions. Third, civil society organizations provide a forum for debate and discussion of issues concerning the extractives and natural resource governance, and communicate these issues and challenges and experiences to the government and to the industry for purposes of checks and balances. Next, civil society organization also informs the government and industry of the value and importance of the rule of law, that they are not above the law, and therefore they should respect and obey the law at all times, especially mining laws or laws concerning the extractives and natural resources. They should be keen in protecting the rights of people, in not infringing on their basic human rights and welfare. Next, civil society organization plays a very important role in crafting sustainable public policies. They are there to help analyze data, evaluate and assess policies, and lobby to implement these policies. Actually, there are a lot of gaps in the initiative or in the advocacy of good governance in natural resources where civil society organizations can fill in. In fact, they need to push for non-fiscal reporting in the PHEITI country report, like environmental reporting, gender and equality reporting, also on health and occupational safety in mining industry and in mining affected communities. So this is where civil society plays a very important role. It should also act independently, make its own analysis and research, and do its own monitoring alongside with government and the industry. The role of civil society is indeed necessary and inevitable in the good governance of natural resources.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Glenn, for highlighting indeed the role of the CSO in facilitating good governance, extractives. At ngayon, subukan po nating pakinggan uli si Mr. Flaviano mula sa province ng South Cotabato at kung paano na i-apply sa kanilang probinsya yung mga policies na nabanggit kanina ng MGD at ni Director Ana. We're so sorry. I think there's really a problem with the sound system of Mr. Flaviano. But nevertheless, let's move on. At kanina, nabanggit na ang EITI or the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative ay nagsuserve bilang platform and tool for addressing the issue and concern in the extractives. So ngayon, pakinggan natin kung paano nagagamit ang EITI as a platform and tool for addressing corruption risks that impedes good governance efforts and initiatives for sustainable community development. So yung ngayong hapon, we will hear about the EITI efforts on promoting good governance in the extractives that would ultimately benefit the public at hanggang sa level ng community. So joining us all the way from Norway is the EITI International's Director for Asia and the Pacific. Her policy work includes contract transparency and providing support on beneficial ownership and anti-corruption. She used to be the national coordinator of PHEITI, an expert in public policy, anti-corruption, and extractive governance sector. Welcome, Attorney Maria Gay Ordenes. Attorney Gay, good morning from where you are, from Norway.
Hi, Jane. Good morning, and good morning to everyone. It it's probably afternoon in Manila right now. Can you hear me okay? I just wanted to check that my audio is working properly. Okay. Okay, good. Thanks. I would like to start by thanking everyone from Philippine EITI for the opportunity to speak today and give this presentation. Always a pleasure to be invited to activities of Philippine EITI. Allow me to introduce myself first. I'm Gay Ordenes. I'm the Asia Director from the EITI International Secretariat. I oversee the implementation of EITI in 14 countries in Asia, including Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and Asia Pacific. So as Jane mentioned, I used to be the national coordinator for the Philippine EITI Secretariat. Hard to believe it's been 7 years since we started EITI. So I really want to congratulate and commend all the stakeholders from EITI in the Philippines. We know that you have done a lot, not only in promoting transparency and accountability in the extractive sector in the Philippines, but also in sort of trailblazing and initiating a lot of innovative ways of implementing EITI, which continues to be cited as best practices in other countries, even to this day. So I hope you're very well pleased with your performance and accomplishments in the EITI circle. So I have the very difficult and challenging task of discussing the role of EITI in addressing corruption in the extractive sector. And I'm supposed to deliver that in less than 7 minutes. So I will try to do that. It's a very interesting topic and also a very broad one, if I may say so. But I will try to cite relevant examples to the Philippines so that we can hopefully bring this issue, this global issue, closer to home. So maybe we can go to the first slide. Right. So the next slide, please. Yeah, so maybe just to set the stage for this discussion, we know that there are a lot of corruption risks in the extractive sector. And in this slide, I have cited some examples, some scandals that we have heard in the recent years where mining oil and gas companies or sometimes state-owned enterprises or national oil companies have been implicated in corrupt practices. So you may have heard about the Lava Jato scandal in Brazil, where Petrobras, the national oil company, was implicated in an investigation involving huge amounts of bribery in granting a license to an oil company. And then you may have heard as well about the Malaysian IMDb scandal, where a company that is not legitimate was used as a conduit to transfer funds from the sovereign wealth fund to the private pockets of public officials in Malaysia. So these are just some illustrative examples of how the oil and gas companies or the extractive sector have been involved in corrupt practices in recent years. Of course, you may have also heard about the Panama Papers, where it was discovered that some mining oil and gas companies are sort of being used as shell companies also to facilitate money laundering or the illicit flows of money from one jurisdiction to another. So I'm sure in the Philippines you can think of similar examples. I won't touch on them. You are the experts on that. But this is just to illustrate how massive the problem is and how it is a problem that cuts across several jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So again, just to highlight the prevalence of corruption in the extractive sector, some analysis on this have been made by OECD, by the implementers of the Foreign Corrupt and Practices Act, where they found out that about 50 actions out of 242 cases filed under FCPA actually involves the extractive sector. So that's about 20% of the cases that they are litigating. So, and that is the highest among all the industries. So this is really quite a substantial number of cases being involving mining oil and gas companies that are, alleged to have been involved in bribery. So again, just to emphasize also how prevalent this issue is in the extractive sector. So next slide, please. So how does the EITI help to address corruption? I'm very happy to see that in this webinar, we have heard presentations from the local government units, from MGB, from Director Anna from DILG, explaining the legal framework, what laws and regulations are in place to make sure that citizens are benefiting from the revenues from the extractive companies. But we all know that laws are only good insofar as they are being implemented properly. But if they're not being implemented properly, even if you have a very good legal framework, it can only go so far. And that hopefully is the role that EITI can play in addressing corruption, in the sense that it will provide some data or evidence that would expose some corruption risks in the extractive sector, or at least some areas that are vulnerable to corruption. The reports being published by Philippine EITI have always been very useful in providing recommendations on how to improve the governance of the extractive sector. So from the first Philippine EITI report that we published in 2014, the MSG has always included recommendations and analysis of gaps in existing systems in government, and how to address those gaps. So I think there has been, there has been some analysis that has been made. How do you improve, for example, the monitoring of revenues, subnational revenues? How do you improve the monitoring of compliance with environmental laws? So those are some examples of how you can start by using the transparency mechanism of the EITI process in not just surfacing gaps, but hopefully, taking a step further and asking yourselves as members of the MSG or as stakeholders of the EITI, asking yourself the question, having known all of these gaps and seeing the areas for improvement, are there gaps in our existing systems that make corruption easier to perpetrate or to commit in our extractive sector? So in this slide, I have set forth just in general the EITI's role in addressing corruption. As I've said, it exposes suspicious deals and transactions. It provides valuable contextual information. It supports citizens' discussions. And again, I'm very pleased to hear the explanation earlier of Director Anna on how citizens' participation is clearly embedded or given a lot of importance in the way the systems at the local level are built. I think Philippine laws have a lot of provisions on how to ensure citizen participation, citizen monitoring. They're involved in the development of local development plans, for example. So I think that is one good way of ensuring that there is transparency in all of the decision-making processes of the government. And hopefully, that is something that where the multi-stakeholder group in the Philippines can also play a role. And again, that is also one encouragement that we at the EITI Secretariat is encouraging MSGs in countries to do, for them to clearly articulate their role in monitoring the active operations, and also hopefully take that further in identifying corruption risks in the extractive sector. So next slide, please. Right. So for those of you who are familiar with what EITI does, there is an EITI standard that maybe I should show you right now. And this is a set of requirements or rules, or as I've said, a global standard for how countries are expected to disclose information about the entire extractive sector value chain. So any country that implements the EITI is required to disclose information from the licensing processes to the contract negotiations to the revenue collection, social expenditures, revenue management, and so forth. So the objective is to make sure that there is transparency along the extractive sector value chain. So given that the specific focus of this forum is on subnational transparency, I'm not going to touch on all the requirements of the EITI standard, but I will focus on some of the requirements that are more relevant in promoting transparency and detecting corruption risks at the subnational level. So, and I have encircled that in this slide. That includes contracts, beneficial ownership, and if you can move on to the next slide. We will also focus on payment flows and revenue collection, on subnational payments. And then there are other topics as well that are relevant to subnational or local government units, such as revenue management and social expenditures. So this, as I mentioned earlier, there are specific requirements under the EITI standard that touch upon this stages or aspects of the extractive sector value chain. And in this presentation, I will illustrate how making this information transparent could help in detecting corruption risks and mitigating corruption in the extractive sector. Next slide, please. So before I discuss these are some examples, and I apologize if the slide is not very clear. Before I discuss some examples that we have seen in other countries on how they are using EITI to identify corruption risks, I want to take a step back and just explain why is corruption very prevalent in the extractive sector. I'm sure you're very familiar with the reasons why, but just to give a quick review, we all know that this is a very complex sector. Very few people actually understand how mining companies operate. How do you actually implement an oil project? And from the licensing stage, understand if you've had the experience of looking at the technical and financial criteria, for example, for mining projects or oil and gas projects, or if you've had the experience of reading extractive contracts, you would understand that this is a very highly technical matter, and it's not easy for the common people to understand what's going on. And because of that, we always say if something is difficult to understand, it's also very easy to hide irregularities surrounding the transactions of a highly complex activity. And this is probably one of the reasons why the extractive sector is very vulnerable to corruption. And that is where we hope EITI can come in. It can shed light and hopefully clarify, simplify all of the relevant information related to the extractive sector, and in that process also provides some reflections to the stakeholders in the country on how to address these corruption risks. So this, as I mentioned, this is something that other countries are doing, and I want to cite some example in the region. In Myanmar, for example, we have seen the EITA report in Myanmar has illustrated that some of their revenues from the extractive sector are being deposited or kept in other accounts of state-owned enterprises. And for many years, nobody really knows or understands how those other accounts are being managed or how those extractive sector revenues are being spent. So that has been a big issue that was discussed in there. I think as early as Myanmar's first EITA report that has already been discussed, and that because there was a lot of public debate around that, it has actually led to the abolishment of the other accounts of state-owned enterprises. So that means that now those other accounts no longer exist, and the Myanmar government is implementing a reform that would make it more transparent for the public to know how the revenues that they collect from the extractive sector are recorded in the national budget. And hopefully, as a step further, they would further analyze how they are actually being managed and spent. So in Papua New Guinea, there's a similar example where the EITA report said that out of the 27 revenue streams from the extractive sector, only 2 are actually recorded in the national budget. And there is no publicly available information on how the 25 other revenues are being recorded. Where do they go? And this is a huge issue in PNG, where perhaps around 30% of their government revenues come from oil, gas, and mining sector. So that is a discussion that they're having in Papua New Guinea, and one of the recommendations of their MSG is to they elevated this matter to the National Economic Council, where hopefully there will be recommendations that will be implemented to make sure that there's more transparency in the management of the revenues from the extractive sector. And then there's another example. in DRC, where they also found out through their EIT reports that the payments received from mining companies are not transferred to the central bank. So I know that Philippine EITI, at least in the early days, also tried to look into this, specifically in the management of the Malampaya Fund, and EITI reports actually have some information on the status of the fund. Perhaps, again, related to the issues we are discussing in this webinar on national revenues, hopefully in the future, there could be further analysis also on how revenues at the local level are being managed by the local government unit. So perhaps that's something that the MSG can consider in implementing the EITI. So next slide, please. So now I want to go straight into the discussion of what are the opportunities for EITI to play a role in addressing or mitigating corruption at the local level. So earlier, I showed 2 slides, some requirements that are relevant to this topic. And now we will go into the details of that. So one of the things that the EITI requires is to disclose contracts. And that's EITI requirement 2.4. So as you know, starting January 1, 2021, all mining oil and gas contracts that have been accepted or amended after that date should be disclosed by all EITI implementing countries. So in the Philippines, I know that you have started disclosing contracts since 2015. You have disclosed mining contracts and oil and gas contracts. Most of them are model contracts. And you have also started disclosing annexes. So that's a good start. But to take that further and to explain the links of that at the national level, there's also an opportunity for you to use the EITI process to require the publication of agreements with indigenous peoples. And I know that you have done some work on that. I remember during my time, we had a lot of discussions with NCIP. Civil society really advocated and demanded for the disclosure of contracts with IPs. And those contracts have been made available to Philippine EITI. I'm not sure if they have been already disclosed publicly by NCIP, but as I said, that's a good start, and that's a way of making sure that the local communities are able to really understand what are the obligations that companies are committing to, and also would give them an opportunity to compare the agreements between one community and another to make sure that they are that there's fairness in how these agreements are entered into. Are they following the proper um, procedures, for example, for free and prior informed consent? Now, I know that this is beyond what the EITI requires, but again, there's really no limit to what the MSG can do and what you can aspire for. So I hope that's something that you can consider, because I know that there's a lot of demand for that, at least when I was national coordinator from the IT communities. Another thing is the requirement on beneficial ownership, which is requirement 5 under the standard. And I'm very glad to hear that you had a session on that yesterday. So this is very important in detecting conflict of interest. As we all know, when we talk about beneficial ownership disclosure, we talk about requiring the companies to disclose the natural persons who actually own the companies. So we know that there are instances, at least anecdotally, of some local chief executives, for example, being involved in mining operations, even though they are also the ones who are mandated issue permits. So there's a clear conflict of interest there. And hopefully that's something that the EITI process could look into. I know that in your data collection procedures of beneficial ownership, you are requiring a lot of detailed information from politically exposed persons. Again, that's a good start, and hopefully you can do further analysis on that. So maybe just to cite an example, we have started a project in Colombia where the beneficial ownership data is being linked or cross-referenced with data from the asset disclosures of politically exposed persons or public officials. And in that process, as we know, public officials, they are required to declare, right, their ownership or their assets. And then on the other hand, the beneficial ownership register also collects information from companies regarding natural persons, including politically exposed persons, who are involved or who are owning this shares in the mining oil and gas companies. So when we cross-referenced the data, we found out that indeed there are a lot, well, not a lot, a few politically exposed persons who are involved in mining activities, even when there are laws prohibiting them to engage in these activities. So that's a corruption risk. That's the type of corruption risk that beneficial ownership transparency would be able to detect. And hopefully, that's a further step that the MSG in the Philippines can also do. I know that we don't have a well-developed system in the Philippines on asset disclosures. As far as I know, we don't have a centralized database for asset disclosures of public officials. But even then, since you already have an existing BO data, which is implemented by the SEC, maybe that's a further step that you can also consider. And then on subnational payments, it's also, as Director Anna explained later, there's a very clear way of computing the revenues that local government units are entitled to. So when we talk about national payments, we talk about direct payments that are made to the local government by mining oil and gas companies, and we also talk about the shares that local government units are entitled to based on the revenue sharing formula that was very well explained by Director Anna earlier. So, but then that begs the question, are there corruption risks in the revenue distribution process? And I remember when I was national coordinator in the Philippines and we used to do all of these roadshows in every province or every municipality that we went to, the common challenge that they were raising was, you know, parating delayed yung shares namin, hindi namin alam kung magkano dapat yung matatanggap namin, hindi namin naintindihan paano kino-compute, minsan delayed ng 2 years, 3 years. So, dahil delayed, nagkakagulo na, hindi na nila maintindihan kung paano yung tamang computation. So, I know that EITI has played a very vital role in clarifying that particular process. And I'm pleased to know that process is still happening until now. And I know that in previous EITA reports, the MSG has come up with quite, a good number of recommendations on how to make the revenue sharing mechanism and the distribution process more transparent. I'm not sure if that issue has been totally addressed right now, if there are still delays. And hopefully the EITI has played a role in minimizing those delays. But as the MSG tries to perhaps articulate or further define its role in mitigating corruption at the subnational level, maybe this is something that we would also want to focus on, especially in areas where extractive revenues are earmarked for specific purposes. I think the monitoring of how those revenues are spent is very important, especially right now, in the COVID-19 context. I know that mining companies in the Philippines are now mandated to spend a portion of their STMPs for, to support health services in the communities where they operate. And hopefully, that is something that's being implemented properly. I think one of the risks that we have seen globally because of COVID-19 is that there has been a lot of shortcuts being made in, implementing policies, in procurement processes, and so forth. Kasi mabilis yung demand and you have to act very quickly. And that makes it very tempting for some public officials to do shortcuts in the usual procedures. That's something that the MSG can also look into, and whether in the spending of this social expenditures that mining companies have committed to provide or allocate for local communities, the distribution of these funds being done properly and still according to existing rules and regulations. So next slide, please. So a few more examples of opportunities at the local level. I already mentioned the social expenditures. Again, you have a very elaborate, the law has a very clear and elaborate way of, monitoring this and mandating that 1.5% of operating expenses should be allocated to social expenditures in communities. And one way of making sure that there are no corruption process being conducted in the allocation of the social expenditure is for the MSG to have a look at whether, first of all, is the 1.5% allocation really being followed, and if it's being followed, do the benefits really go to the rightful beneficiaries? Kasi if I will, again, basing from my experience, when we used to do a lot of roadshows in the Philippines, we also heard some complaints from stakeholders in local communities saying that, oh, we know that we're supposed to be entitled to this, pero hindi naman namin ang nakita namin instead, a particular company made a donation to birthday celebration of a particular local chief executive. So it's a form of bribery and corruption that could be detected if you see that not the entire 1.5% is really going to the local communities that they are supposed to go to. And then just to highlight also that there are new requirements in the EITI standard with respect to environmental reporting. And this is also something that MSG might want to look into. It's not a requirement right now. I need to clarify that it's an encouragement for countries to also disclose environmental impact assessments. What are the environmental obligations that companies are supposed to follow, and in just explaining the legal framework for this or the local regulations for this, that could also empower the citizens to monitor whether companies are complying with this, and if they're not complying with it, how come they're not being sanctioned? Meron bang bribery na nangyayari? Bakit hindi sila punish for not following all these environmental requirements? Another area where that is very prone to corruption risk are the local content commitments. So if you look at some oil contracts, for example, you will usually find a provision there where oil companies are required to make use of local goods and services in their operations. And the corruption risk here is sometimes when, for example, the oil company or a mining company operates in a local community, and they have their goods locally, usually yung supplier is someone who is linked to the public officials in that community. So parating sila yung priority. Again, if a process doesn't undergo a competitive bidding procedure, that is susceptible or vulnerable to corruption. So that's another thing that the MSG may want to look into. I know that model contracts in the Philippines, at least for oil and gas, and I think also for mining, contains some local content stipulation. So you might also want to have a look at that, even if it's not included in the EITI standard. And there are countries that are looking into this, or less, for example. And then there are other things that, again, not covered by the standard, but no limit really to what the MSG can do. You can look at the issue of responsible sourcing in the entire value chain. Are you sure that, lahat ba in all the stages of the value chain, from production to trading commodities, lahat ba yung stages na yan are all the commodities responsibly sourced, or meron bang smuggling na nangyayari in between? So these are the things that you can also look into, even if they are not covered for now by the EITI standard. And then another example, and this we've seen in Indonesia, they have been discussing whether there are some cost recoverable items. And so when we talk about cost recovery, it means that certain costs could be deducted from the tax liabilities of companies. And that's normal. That alone doesn't mean that there is corruption. Talaga namang may mga ganyang agreements in certain contracts. But where corruption comes in is when, for example, it's very lopsided in favor of the company to the point that the terms of the cost recoverable mechanism are already disadvantageous to the government. So in some jurisdictions, we know, and in the Philippines, this applies as well. If the government enters into a contract that is grossly disadvantageous to the government, that's considered as corruption. So that's something that you might also want to look into. I don't know if there's opportunity for the MSG to possibly consider some cost audits as well. And some of these terms are also found in contracts. I remember, again, in the early days, there was a lot of discussion in EITI about tax incentives being granted companies, and whether these tax incentives are actually fair, how much is the foregone revenues from the government. I remember that discussion even reached the MICC during the time, so that the incentives are stipulated in separate agreements, not in the main contract, but in separate agreements, could also be um, disclosed and analyzed by civil society. So that's another example as well of how you can possibly detect corruption risks in cases where the tax incentives are not reasonable and are already disadvantageous to the government. So next slide. So this is my final slide, and I want to leave you with some recommendations on what can the MSG do to mitigate corruption risks. So, as you know, the EITI board early this year made a decision to really encourage governments in EITI countries to include anti-corruption in their national objectives. So, and this is in recognition of the fact that um, that's somehow the gap and the criticism that EITI always gets. Why is it not you know clearly defining its role in addressing corruption? And in fact, many EITI countries are actually involved in a lot of corruption scandals in the sector. So what is EITI doing to address this? And that's the reason why in February this year, the board decided that, okay, it's time that we tackle this issue head on and really give MSGs a strong encouragement to include it in their national objectives. So in the Philippines, you have a very well-defined set of national objectives. As far as I know, there's no direct reference to mitigating corruption, although I know that it's very implicit in all of your objectives, in all the activities that you do. But perhaps, now is the time, and this is really an encouragement from our part, for the MSG to revisit its national objectives for implementing the EITI, reflect corruption mitigation as one clear objective. And related to that, it would also be a good practice to engage anti-corruption bodies in the country, including at the national level. So we have countries where anti-corruption bodies are part of the MSG. Mongolia, for example, they have that. In Indonesia, the Corruption Eradication Commission is not part of the MSG, but it is closely following the process, and there's engagement with the Corruption Eradication Commission with respect to their work on beneficial ownership and commodity trading. And in Myanmar, the Anti-Corruption Commission is also very much involved in their own work on beneficial ownership. So perhaps that's something that you can also consider. And then hopefully there would also be some activities related to identifying how EIT reporting could shed light on corruption risks. What steps are needed? So you have been publishing your EIT reports. I think somebody mentioned earlier that admittedly, there's still a need to demonstrate impact And hopefully the impact of EITI in the Philippines on addressing corruption could be more pronounced or more visible. And you can do that by making sure that your EITI reports are providing the data that is needed to help further investigation of corrupt practices in the extractive sector in the Philippines. So again, to cite an example, in Indonesia, when they published their commodity trading report, the MSG gave a presentation of that report to the Corruption Eradication Commission, which motivated the commission to say, okay, this is very interesting. In our investigation, these are the data sets that we need to make sure that we are prosecuting the right people or to detect if there's corruption in our oil trade. And so they ask the MSG to include that data set in the next commodity trading report of Indonesia. So, but that's a work in progress, and that discussion is still ongoing. So hopefully that really happens in Indonesia's next commodity trading report. But that's something that you can also consider in the Philippines. And then the last 2 points, we again highly encourage you to consider the anti-corruption angle in your ongoing work. As I've said, I know this is already implicit in your work on BO, contract transparency, subnational transparency. But if you engage anti-corruption actors, that would also help you in focusing that work even more towards addressing corruption, especially if you get their inputs on the type of data or evidence that they need for them to carry out their work in addressing corruption. And then lastly, capacity building for stakeholders is very important. Just the act of explaining the legal framework, what are the liabilities of public officials in the permitting process, for example, what is defined as abuse in public power for private abuse in the use of power for private gain. How is that? How does that manifest in the extractive sector and in the exercise of functions of public officials? Just trying to understand how these dynamics take place, especially at the subnational level, we think would be very important in addressing corruption risks. So I think that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Gay, for that comprehensive presentation and even the best practices from various countries. So, moving on, this afternoon we are fortunate to hear from the Natural Resource Governance Institute, or NRGI. PHITI has been working with NRGI in building the contracts portal, which has been discussed by Attorney Gray earlier. So everyone, today we have the Senior Governance Officer of NRGI, Mr. Matthew Salomon. Matthew, please, over to you.
Thank you, Jane. Just checking if everybody can hear me okay.
Yes, Matthew, loud and clear.
Okay, thanks. Just on behalf of NRGI, it's a pleasure and honor to be invited to this webinar. Actually, we've been working quite closely over the years on supporting Philippine EITI process and stakeholders, in particular working closely with Bandai Kitai. And my first trip to Manila was actually related to EITI, was actually in 2012. I was previously the manager for Asia Pacific and Myanmar for NRGI. And when we were still called Revenue Watch Institute also. So it's a pleasure to see. And please, I'm not going to repeat what Gay just mentioned, but continue the great work. It's Philippine EITI achievement is probably some of the example I've been using the most over the world when advocating about the potential of EITI to actually deliver some meaningful change. So I'm going to build on what Gay already presented, and so not coming back to the why corruption, fighting corruption in extractive is important, not coming back to the broader EITI momentum around anti-corruption work, and also because I'm conscious of time, and you've had already quite a number of presentations, so I'm going to directly dive into presenting quickly some of NRGI's initiatives to support EITI stakeholders in combating corruption. Thanks. What we're trying to build in our anti-corruption programming, one of our projects is to design this corruption diagnostic tool for EITI stakeholders. Quickly to give you an idea, it's going to be to look like a structured questionnaire and methodology to identify and assess corruption risks. The objective is not to uncover past cases of corruption, but it's really to prevent future corruption to happening. And we're designing the tool to build on EITI strengths, which are mainly the multi-stakeholder approach, but also the very important dimension given to data and to evidence-based information. But we're also taking into account EITI limitation related to the no investigation mandate and to the issue that sometimes anti-corruption actors are not involved in EITI, even if, as Gay just mentioned before, you have more and more EITI processes that include anti-corruption actors and institutions. What the tool will allow, we hope, it will allow EITI stakeholders to check that the EITI process is addressing top corruption risk in their country, and that scarce resources are well allocated. And we hope that the finding would feed into action plans and impact evaluation. We hope that the tool will provide us a structured and evidence-based approach to convening multi-stakeholder discussion about a topic that we know is still sensitive and controversial. Even if you have more and more anti-corruption agenda explicit in EITI countries, then we know it's still sensitive and controversial. We hope that the tool will allow to identify specific transactions, processes, and practices where more transparency and oversight are needed in order to reduce corruption vulnerabilities. And we hope that the tool will draw attention to priority anti-corruption need for EITI itself, but also for anti-corruption authorities, regulators, NGOs, international institutions, and other actors. Next slide, please. So this is how the tool will look like. It will be there will be three main parts. The first one around priority identification, and that's basically deciding, which area the multi-stakeholder groups wants to focus on. First choosing which community, being oil, gas, mining, and why not a specific mineral. But also identifying which decision chain stages are the most prone to corruption. Could be the decision to extract, including licensing and contract, could be in operation, which include regulation and subcontracting, revenue collection, state-owned enterprises, revenue allocation, and we will also have a number of other areas like energy transition, which is one of the agenda that EITI is also working on. Then the second step will be an in-depth analysis, analyzing the incentive and drivers behind corruption. Why do these issues arise? What are the underlying vulnerabilities? Who are the main actors? What are their motivations, and so on. And then the first part, probably the most important somehow, will be the action planning. And obviously through a participatory process and building a consensus around action worthy to be taken. And that will include assessing and prioritizing the risk, evaluating the feasibility of reform, and identifying concrete action to take. But I want to insist on the fact that the tool will be really driven by users' priority, by EITI stakeholders from implementing countries' priorities. And for example, if the most important, given, for example, the topic of the webinar today is sustainable community development, then we can easily imagine that the selected areas that would be that would be relevant for you are the one more directly related to the corruption risk at the local level, and all the areas that basically Gay circled in our previous presentations. Next slide, please. In practice, the process will be as simple as possible and as straightforward as possible. So the MSG will decide to conduct an assessment and set the scope using the questionnaire provided. Will ideally have an independent assessment team who will gather information through data analysis, interviews, focus groups, and prepare the report that the MSG will consider the findings and agree on an action plan. In practice, like for the beneficial ownership agenda, for example, there could be a subcommittee from the MSG working specifically on anti-corruption that could be set up to make the work more manageable and to take into account the fact that we know very well that MSG members are busy and so on. But we do hope to have a process led by questionnaire accompanying guidance that would be very user-friendly. We know that the MSG operate with budget and time constraints, so the use of the tool would not be too expensive or labor-intensive. And to give you an example, we hope that such diagnostic corruption risk assessment could be done in 3 to 4 months. So we are sure that it saves the momentum of anti-corruption at a specific time and in a specific country. That's for the diagnostic tool. I'm just going to end my presentation, next slide please, by flagging one upcoming report that NRGI has been working on. So we've been working on this report to inform the development of our tool, but at the same time as a kind of separate initiative. We are going to publish very soon a report looking at how EITI reporting helps fight extractive sector corruption. For that, we've reviewed EITI documents from 17 countries, including some of Philippine EITI, to identify the trends in how EITI reporting presents corruption-related information. That relates very much to some of the slides that Gay presented earlier. We'll be happy to make a longer presentation of that report when it's published, but just to quickly give you some quick highlights from its findings and recommendation. The RTI, as it would probably be obvious to many of you, rarely talks directly about corruption, but there is in the ITI reporting so much relevant information that highlights governance weaknesses, provides useful raw data and contextual information. I think this is, part of the example that Gay presented about Myanmar and other country in the previous presentations. We also find that the initiative relevance go actually way beyond the reconciliation reports themselves, and that other EITI documents and the MSG process itself are very important channels for strengthened anti-corruption efforts. Last words on just to give you some example of some of the recommendation that will be in the report, and that will be my conclusion also. Regarding to the general understanding of anti-corruption efforts that EITI reporting includes, it could be encouraged for countries implementing EITI include a brief description of the anti-corruption legal and institutional framework. Regarding documenting corruption, EITI reporting could more explicitly draw attention to corruption cases. In some of the most successful examples we reviewed in the report, The independent administrator reference, for example, official external documents such as Auditor General reports, court cases, government inquiries, to highlight instances of wrongdoings. In other cases, the EITI documents capture concern expressed by EITI stakeholders. In overall reporting could also draw more on credible external reports. I'm not going to give you all these kind of recommendation, but obviously on the long term, and that would be my last word, and to echo Gay's conclusion also, in the long term, the EITI might consider expanding EITI reporting requirements into additional higher risk areas where reporting requirements are currently lighter, such as the rulemaking processes, what we call state captures, SOE spending, and company procurement and subcontracting. There is, as we've always presented the EITI at NRGI, the standard are somehow minimum requirement, but there is no limit to the sky, and Philippine EITI is probably very well placed to continue to be at the avant-garde and pilot some new initiative in relation to anti-corruption commitments. So obviously happy to answer any question, and I know we probably not have a lot of time, so also please feel free to reach out to us, and you have my contact. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak today, and over to you, Jane. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing with us the available tools for diagnosing corruption in the extractives. We know that we went over time, pero pakiusapan namin kayo to lend us 10 minutes of your time para sa ating question and answer portion. Marami po tayong mga questions na ipinadala sa ating chat room. And to respond to those questions, we're welcoming back our speakers earlier. We have Sir Calvin from MGB. And Sir Calvin will be joined in by Engineer Romy Aguilos, one of the members of MSG from the Mines and Geosciences Bureau. Sir Calvin, and also joining us as panelist for the question and answer is Director Ana Bonagua, DILG, and Dr. Glenn Pajares from STANS, and of course, Attorney Gay and Matthew Salomon. So we have very specific questions here sent in by our participants from Zoom and FB. The first question goes to Sir Calvin Perez. Ito po. Ang tanong po ay kung may mga pagkakataon na raw po ba na hindi nakatupad sa pangako ang mga kumpanya, pangakong SDMP ang mga kumpanya. Kung nangyari po ito, paano ina-address ng MGB? Sir Calvin and Engineer Romy, please. Whoever wants to respond to this.
Sir Romy, may I? Sir Romy, volume.
Go ahead,
Jane,
Alvin.
Ma'am Jane, before I answer the question, kaklarify ko lang po yung sa presentation ko kanina, specifically on the percentage allocation for those exploration companies that is required of a community development program. I mentioned 1%. It is 10% of the approved exploration work program. Baka singilin ako pag nag-report sila po annually. To answer the question po, specific po dun sa ating IRR, under Section 136F, if on the first offense, an operating company is found na wala pong approved SDMP, ay meron po siyang fine na 5,000 pesos. Pag naulit po uli yun, so nagkaroon ng cycle ng monitoring, naulit po uli yun, na nag-ooperate sila na wala pong approved SDMP, ay tantamount for the suspension on or cancellation of its permit. Yun po. And of course, within the year of implementation, meron pong mga monitoring guidelines na sinusunod po. And any violation on that, yun po, magre-revert back tayo doon sa penalty na nabanggit ko po.
Okay, so merong penalty, merong karampatang monetary penalty at revocation ng kanilang kontrata. Maraming salamat, Sir Calvin. Engineer Roms, meron ka pa pong idadagdag response?
Okay na. I think it was satisfied naman siguro doon si sagot ni Mr. Calvin.
Salamat po. Meron pa pong isang katanungan. Patungkol naman po ito. Again, this is for MGB. Ang tanong po ay meron bang authority ang LGU para i-prohibit yung large-scale mining within their political boundary? So, meron daw po bang authority ang LGU para i-prohibit ang large-scale mining? Siguro sa area nila, meron mga nag-a-apply.
Sir Romy?
Teka, mukhang nalobat ako.
Sige, ako na lang po muna uli. Ako na lang po muna uli.
Okay. Pahapyaw lang. Kasi mayroong mga cases na gaya ng sa Tampakan still under Supreme Court pa rin yung gaya yan over yung local ordinances na
natuluyan na yata yung ni Sir.
Okay, mukhang nag-lag si Sir Romy. Sir Calvin, would you like to respond to that question?
Opo. Sa proseso po ng pagtanggap po ng mga applications, merong part po doon na kinakailangan mag-secure po ng ano pong tawag dito, yung support documents o yung pagpapahintulot po. Tatlong sangay po ng ahensya po yon. Una po yung barangay natin, sunod po munisipyo, tapos yung provincial po, courtesy of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan. So ang kailangan po noon na mag-secure po yung applicant ng mga certificate from them na pumapayag sila. So kapag sa tingin nila yung project po ay makakakos ng environmental as well as social and safety and health issues, pwede po yun gamitin nilang platform para hindi po payagan. Hindi po magtutuloy o hindi po pwedeng yung tinatawag na mag-backdoor yung application. Kailangan po ma-resolve muna po yung process na yun bago po magtuloy po yung application.
Kung mag-a-apply, merong prosesong pagdadaanan. Maraming salamat, Sir Calvin. Ang kasunod na tanong po, I think this is for Director Ana. Ang tanong po ay, meron bang mga mechanisms instituted by DILG in ensuring that the national wealth share para sa barangay ay nagagamit according to the purpose provided in the existing guidelines? Kung hindi man po ito matususunod, meron daw po bang mga disciplinary action that are already in place? Director Ana?
Magandang hapon. Napakaganda nung tanong, no? Kasi ngayon, kung makita natin yung pinresent ko po na ENRDMT, Environmental Management Reporting System, ito po ay a system which is attached to the ESRE, yung Statement of Expenditure, Receipts and Expenditure ng DLGF. Right now po, hindi kasama ang barangay sa mga nagsasubmit ng sa online platform ng ESRE. But then recently, I think if I remember right, 2019 or 2018, ang DILG at ang Bureau of Local Government Finance ng DOF ay nag-issue na ng guidelines para sa mga barangay for them to submit financial reports to BLGF through the accountants of higher local government units or cities and municipalities. Although hindi pa po ito online at hindi pa po kasing stable at transparent ng reporting system tulad ng ESRE o ng ERDMT. We are trying our best dahil meron tayong 42,000 barangays plus to make sure na meron tayong platform to actually cover the reporting system for the barangay. Sinisimulan po natin yan ngayon pero hindi pa po siya kumbaga hindi pa po siya operational. We have some specific reports na nakukuha, lalo na yung mga nagre-report ng irregularities and inconsistencies in the use, pero wala po tayong kabuuan para sa mga lahat ng barangay all over the Philippines.
Maraming salamat, Director Ana. Yung susunod na tanong po ay para sa inyo rin. Pinsan nung unang tanong. Ang tanong po ay, posible ba that the LGU have an additional committee in the local special bodies that will solely focus on natural resource governance? Pwede
Yes
daw
po.
po ba mag-establish?
Opo. Sa Local Development Council, pwede pong mag-create ng local government units ng iba-iba na subcommittees as they see fit. So kung gusto nila magkaroon ng subcommittee on natural resources protection, pwede po nilang gawin yan. And whatever priorities that they have in their locality, pwede po silang gumawa ng subcommittees.
Maraming salamat, Director Ana. Ang susunod na tanong po ay directed kay Attorney Gay. Malapit na yung Philippine election. How do EITI address extractive companies that are engaged in financing election campaign? Can this be stopped if in case merong ganitong nangyayari? Attorney Gay, your experience, please.
Yes, so thank you for that question. I mean, I think directly because, election financing, obviously it's not covered by the EITI standard. So I think it might be, I don't know what the MSG thinks about this, but it might be too remote to actually require that, as a disclosure in EITI reporting. Medyo malayo siya hindi masyadong connected. But still, for further analysis, some information that's being disclosed in EITI could be useful. So for example, as far as I know, public officials or candidates are required by COMELEC, diba, to submit a list of all their donors or sino yung nagfa-finance ng campaign nila. So that's a requirement under COMELEC. Now, what you can do as a step further is if you see that there's a mining company that gave a substantial donation to a particular candidate, then you can check if that candidate has been involved in issuing a permit to that particular company. And you can check that because EITI reports disclose when the licenses have been granted, kailan yung date of application, kailan yung date na approve, ano yung duration ng project. You can cross-reference that to the detail of when, for example, ito bang candidate na ito, was he the local chief executive at the time that this company applied for a mayor's permit, for example. So, there has to be some cross-referencing of data that you should do to take it a step further. So, in a very direct way, mahirap to require EITI to, do something to prevent that or to stop that. I think it's beyond the mandate of EITI. But cross-referencing all the existing data being disclosed through EITI could go a long way in detecting possible conflicts of interest. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Attorney Gay. Use EITI. For that matter, use the data from EITI. And the next question is for Matthew. It's just a question on if you need volunteer to the test in your diagnostic tool, what's the process of joining the pilot tests?
Thank you very much for the question. Sorry, my presentation was a bit short, so I didn't have time to mention clearly where we are. The tool should be ready in the couple of weeks, and we are indeed looking for a number of EITI stakeholders, EITI implementing country who would be interested for their own agenda to pilot, to use and pilot the tool. We hope to have a couple of as you can imagine, the designing such kind of tool is not the easiest thing. So we hope to have a couple of pilots from different countries to be able to learn some lessons and to revise the tool based on these experiences. The process at this point is just to reach out to us at NRGI, or even reach out to Eiti International Secretariat, and Gay will be the contact for Asia Pacific countries, because we've been working very closely with the Secretariat on that, and probably express some interest from the MSG members to put that on their agenda, consider that probably for their 2021 work plan. As soon as we are in a position to present something more detailed to interested stakeholders, then we'll do that. We plan to, would hopefully like these pilots to be run in the first part of 2021. As I mentioned, the idea is to really design some tools that are user-friendly, and also, that not going to last for 2 years. That's really not the idea. The idea is to have a process and an implementation guide for the tool that can allow Eiti implementing country to engage in these diagnostic efforts in 3 to 4 months. So you get some concrete result relatively soon. So please, reach out to us and the ITI Secretariat, and we can discuss further. Obviously, very happy to hear some interest.
Thank you, Matthew. And you can use the ITI indeed as a platform to give an update on that effort. I think the last question we have, this is for Sir Calvin and Engineer Romy, if he's still around. Pagbibigay pansin po ito dun sa epekto ng small-scale mining, particularly yung experience ng Albay. So siguro in general, ano ba ang ginagawa natin patungkol sa small-scale mining? Sir Calvin and Engineer Romy.
Yes,
Sir Romy?
magandang hapon uli. Sorry, nawala
Please.
ako kanina. Right now, we're in the process of, what do you call it, formalizing the small-scale miners, yung mga ating mga illegal small-scale miners. We are putting into one place yung tinatawag nating minahambayan, and para ma-monitor natin sila, and sa isang lugar lang sila, hindi gaya ng yung mga illegal miners na kung saan lang nila gustong magmina, capable sila. However, sa ngayon kasi, yung nabasa ko dun sa chat, parang they are blaming the mining per se dun sa pagbaha. Yung nakita kong question eh. However, if yung case natin sa Albay, it's not we cannot purely blame mining on the sa flooding, kasi in fact yung mga small scale quarrying do sa area ay nakakatulong po ito sa pag mitigate ng pagbaha, because they are dredging the river para lumalim, para to accommodate more silt. Ang nangyari lang kasi doon na kaya bumaha, nag-overflow, maraming tubig na binaba ang ulan, and also binaba rin yung lahar and pyroclastic materials na nasa slope ng Mayong Volcano. And we should not blame small-scale mining, quarrying. In fact, yung mining quarrying doon, iisa lang po, and it was a limestone area na approved doon sa may vicinity ng bulkan. Pero yung sinasabi nating sa ginagawa namin ngayon sa illegal small-scale mining, we are in the process of formalizing them through Minahambayan. Yun lang po. Salamat po.
Salamat, Engineer Romy and Sir Calvin, for sharing the mechanism directed for small-scale mining. At pasensya na po, may mga dumadating pa na katanungan, but what we can do is to put together the questions that you sent in at ipadadala po namin ang mga question na yan sa nararapat na agency at isisend namin ang mga responses sa inyo through the email you use in registering to this segment. So, to cap this segment of the ETW, let's hear again from Director Ana Bonagua of DILG's BLGF.
Okay, thank you, Jane. We have come to the end of this very interesting conversation of today's session of the PITI Extractive Industry Week. This forum is titled Extractive Governance and Community Development. So very interesting yung ating discussion. Siyempre, laging kulang ang time. This afternoon session actually shared with us some interesting information on natural resource governance, particularly on the extractive sector and its contribution in the development of our communities and localities, particularly those affected by the extractive operations. As presented earlier, we are blessed that our country is rich in natural resources. And we as stewards of the environment, it is really up to us, to every one of us, to ensure that we do not abuse the nature's gift to us, specifically tayo sa Pilipinas. When we talk about environment or the use of natural resources, sustainability is always at the center of the discussion. So there comes the natural resource governance, and to ensure balancing social and environment and economic impacts of actions and decisions of government as well as the civil society and the communities on the sustainable use of the natural resources. As we harness our country's resources, we have to ensure that this redounds to the benefits for the community as well as the environment. And this afternoon's conversation actually highlighted the existing mechanisms in place to ensure good and inclusive governance of the country's natural resources, particularly policies governing and also the implementation gaps, as well as the identified actions to improve the extractive sector governance. Underscored in the discussion is the crucial role of the community and the community participation in the utilization of the natural resource revenues, and to ensure that these are flowed back to the community to address the needs of the communities and the affected communities, and also towards the protection of our environment. Likewise, kanina, the province of South Cotabato demonstrated how the province actually harnessed stakeholders' participation to guarantee inclusiveness of the program of the province, as well as to ensure transparency in the extractive governance, and to some extent actually to deter corruption within the local government sector. And furthermore, we heard some in-depth discussion, very interesting, on how EITI at the global scene is being used as a platform for diagnosing, addressing corruption, and in support of better extractive governance and sustainable community development. So, today, I myself learned a lot from this discussion. So, therefore, in closing, we hope the EITI MSG hope that as we end this conversation, we have some takeaways. Meron tayong mga baon, no? Hindi tayo alis na wala tayong natutunan. Especially on the important role of each of the stakeholder of every sector in the management of the country's resources, especially that of the extractive host communities, which stand to either lose or benefit the most in the extractive activities. So yan ang ating, I think that's one great takeaway. and that there are mechanisms within the government to actually ensure that these are being used where it is intended to be used as provided for under our laws. We cannot overemphasize also the critical role of the multi-stakeholder and whole of society approach. No, so it's extractive as we are presenting now in the EITI and the PHEITI. The importance of the multi-stakeholder conversation, government, business, and also the communities represented by the civil society organization. And therefore, we encourage everyone, especially all of you present here today, you as being valuable stakeholder to continue to participate in the conversations on good governance, environmental protection, social welfare, and sustainable development. No, the PHEITI for the entire week of the Extractive Industry Week have lined up a lot of very interesting topics for discussion. So I hope makaparticipate kayo and we also invite you to participate in the other sessions. Still, on behalf of the PHEITI MSG, we invite you to join the PHEITI National Conference. Ito na yung culmination of our celebration for the week. This is set to happen tomorrow na, November 26 starting at 9 o'clock. There, you may expect to learn about the status of the Philippine extractive sector based on the 6th report na ito yung bubutihang i-improve at i-accomplish ng PHEITI MSG every year. So, hindi na po kami nagpapasko taon-taon para lang matapos natin yung report. And we're inviting you to listen and to hear what the report has to say for this year. This is already the 6th report. We would like, at this point, we're ending, so we would like to thank all our speakers, our guests. Wala na yata si Governor Kua, our very valuable speakers, no? From the MSG as well as from South Cotabato. And then from our colleagues from the EITI, Global EITI, and our friend Matthew from the civil society organization for giving us some light on how these are happening also at the international scene. So with that, I hope to greet you, every one of you, a great day. Marami pong salamat, and stay safe and healthy, everyone. Good afternoon po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, Director Ana. And again, on behalf of the PHEITI, maraming salamat sa ating mga speakers. Matthew Salomon of NRGI, Attorney Gay Ordenes of PITI International, Mr. Calvin Perez of DNR-MGB, and of course, Engineer Romy Aguilos of MGB, Doc Glenn of STANS. Maraming salamat po sa inyo at sa lahat ng ating mga participants. Salamat po sa inyong pakikinig at salamat sa inyong oras. Paalala lang po namin sa inyo, kung maaaring mag-send kayo ng inyong feedback for this segment. The Secretariat is, I think, sending you the evaluation form in the Zoom chat box. Kindly accomplish it and send it back to us. Salamat po muli sa inyo at magandang hapon.